Hey, you're listening to the Sales Hunter podcast. I'm Mark Hunter. Today, joining me, Tiffani Bova. She is the global growth evangelist at Salesforce and the author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Growth IQ. Get smarter about the choices that will make or break your business. Hey, Bova has been named to the latest Thinkers 50s list of the world's top management thinkers and is a welcomed guest on Bloomberg, BNN, Cheddar, MSNBC, Yahoo Finance, and right here on the Sales Hunter podcast, among others. Hey, you know what? I guess we need to get the show going.
You're listening to the Sales Hunter podcast with Mark Hunter, where the focus is to help you as a sales leader sell with confidence and integrity. And now here's your host.
Closing deals. Calendly knows how important maintaining momentum is for your sales team. Calendly provides the automation you need to connect with your best leads faster and schedule every meeting throughout your sales cycle. Hey, prevent scheduling delays that stall deals and let your team focus on what they do best, driving revenue. Request your demo of Calendly today. We'll put a link in the show notes for you. But right now, we've got to get to this conversation. Tiffani, welcome to the Sales Hunter podcast.
Oh, Mark, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hey, we haven't seen each other. I'm trying to think of the last time we saw each other was
Boston.
What was it, Boston? Now, when was that? Because I was going to say it was San Francisco, but okay, so it was Boston.
So it was Boston, and it was, I forget the event, but it was Magic Johnson was speaking, Grant Cardone, you, myself. Yeah, it was Boston.
That's right. That was a great event. Yes, it is. Because again, our paths cross, but sometimes they don't cross. But hey, enough about our journeys, our travels. Let's talk about the journey of sales and where sales is headed, because you have a great seat with Salesforce. I mean, you truly do have the best job in the world. No ifs, ands, buts about it. So anyway, talk to us. What's the future of sales? Because Salesforce just came out with a new study. So tip the hat to us.
Yeah, so we just did a global study of about 7,000, a little more than 7,000 sales professionals. So both sales managers as well as sales individuals. And, you know, I don't think there was anything groundbreakingly surprising in it. But what I will tell you is I feel like we're still struggling to get the basics right. You know, and Mark, you may agree with me or not agree with me, but, you know, we've had this advent of technology for, you know, many, many decades now, kind of 2.5 decades as we start talking about software as a service and really the cloud changing the dynamic of the way sellers can actually engage with their customers, both during, you know, prior to the sales process and during and sort of post-sales. Yet we still have this hiccup around cross-functional alignment, right, between teams, like how very 80s of us, you know, hybrid selling. And while the pandemic really pushed us into this almost 100% virtual selling, I'd argue we've always been hybrid selling, but I think that now it is a different kind of relationship and decision tree and when and where we decide to be digital first or be, you know, in person first. The other is, you know, digging into the data that we're now capturing across all of these various selling tools. But within that selling tool, the stack of technology has gotten a little fat. So we've got to try to slim that down. And that really falls into this modernizing tools and technology. So I think when you hear those things, it's like, could we have said that 5 years ago? Yes. Could we have said it, you know, 10 years ago? Yes. So that's why I'm saying that I think, to me, while the statistics and the numbers are moving ever so slightly, we're still grounded in some of these basic things that we're just not getting right.
Oh, wow. You said so much there, from this whole thing of cross-functional. We're still not getting this whole cross-functional thing, hybrid. You know, it's funny. I used to say we've had hybrid selling for years. As long as we've had a telephone, we've been doing hybrid sales.
Yes.
But your whole thing about kind of that sales tech stack, it's gotten a little fat. Yeah, it has. Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, I'll just date myself for a minute here. You know, I was really early in the cloud. I was Eloqua's beta client. I was Constant Contact's beta client, actually. And we were selling, remotely. And back then in the MarTech sales stack, there was maybe a half a dozen technologies that we were thinking about, right? It was kind of single user version of Act or Goldmine or whatever you might have been using, or even your just
Goldmine. There are people there saying, "What's that? Never heard of it."
Yeah. Or just a Rolodex on your desk. Novel idea. But back then, half a dozen or so. Now, Scott Brinkner tracks over 9,000 marketing technology products. So during the last 23, 24 years, we've gone from, let's call it 10, I'm being dramatic here, maybe 100, whatever, to over 9,000. And we've split that hair in so many ways, but unfortunately, we're still only spending 28% of our time selling. And still, 50% of sales teams and individuals miss quota. So even with all those advancements in tech, we're still not spending time selling and we're still not hitting quota.
Okay, let's back up. Let's back the bus up there.
Yep.
If you're on the 405, do not pull over the shoulder and stop right now. Keep driving.
Yes.
But what I want you to hear is those numbers. You said 28% of our time selling, and that's it, right?
72% non-selling.
Non-selling. Think about that. 72% of the time, non-selling.
Yeah, and it could be like prioritizing leads, researching, preparation. So it's not that it's not kind of sales activities, right?
I totally get that, right? But it's not customer facing. And, I always say, measure your CFT, your customer facing time. And it's interesting because, isn't technology supposed to allow us to spend more time with the customer?
Right. Which is why I said, right, those three things to me are connected, right? The tech stack has gotten fatter. And if you look over the decade, the number and percentage, and this is a CSO Insights stat, which is now Miller Hyman, which is now Korn Ferry.
I know.
Right.
And wait, it may change again tomorrow. Yeah.
It might. I don't know. But they sort of tracked, sales reps hitting quota. And that number has remained in sort of the low 50% range for over a decade. While at the same time, technology has gotten smarter, faster, AI, predictive, virtual selling, connection between tools, social media expanding, the channels and platforms expanding, all this getting, more and more complex has resulted in, because that 72% of non-selling time is actually up. The last time our state of sales, it was a 68% number. So, or 66. So we've gone up on non-selling time. So if you look at companies like Salesforce and others that focus in on this space, you're like, look, we're making huge investments on trying to streamline processes to, improve the performance of sellers, integrate, tech stacks. And the average enterprise, this is not just marketing technologies, but the average enterprise has a little more than 900 unique applications in it. Yet only 27% of them are integrated. So the problem we have is, as the stack gets bigger, the integration is not happening. So then the employee, and in this case, the conversation we're having is around sellers, is having to, we've all been there, open 5 different things to do our job, none of which are integrated. Data is different in every place. And then you wonder why only, 28% of the time is used selling.
You just called out the elephant in the room. Only 27% of those are integrated, because
Correct.
I was just having a conversation with a VP of sales today, and she was lamenting to me how her entire day was being spent trying to get a couple projects out the door with her team, but they were going back and forth because things were not integrated.
Right.
And yet you would think, with all the advent of technology,
right,
we would have mastered that, but it
Right.
hasn't, because, and it comes back to this other piece he said, that the percent of salespeople not making quota really hasn't changed. And yet supposedly it hasn't changed for the last decade. And yet supposedly we've all become a lot smarter. Where's that knowledge going? It's certainly not going into helping us make quota.
Yeah, I'd say we, and I often say this on stage, and for those of you who have seen me, you'll know exactly what I'm about to say, but I don't believe we have a technology problem. I believe we have a people process problem. And I
was hoping you would say that. I didn't want to steal your thunder, but I'm glad you said it.
Yep. And I've been saying this now for, prior to joining Salesforce, I was a research fellow at Gartner for a decade, and my area of coverage was sales transformation. I've been saying this for almost 15, 16 years now. But now that I work at Salesforce, it's not lost on me. Of course, we don't have a technology problem. I work at Salesforce. So now I say we don't have a technology problem. We have a technology, people, and process problem. But I really mean we have a people and process problem, right?
It's so true, because I see people going out and grabbing a tool because they think it's going to provide all the solutions they need. This is going to be the secret sauce that they've been looking for. Just one more tool. And go back to your whole thing, that all we've done is we've fattened up that tech stack that we use in sales. Wow.
Yeah, and this is where what we've also seen in the research over the last 3 versions of State of Sales that Salesforce has put out, this I think is our 7th, is that sales operations is getting a bigger seat at the table. And so a lot of this has to do with this conversation we're having. Streamlining processes, automating processes, looking for redundancy, looking for integration points. But unfortunately, many sales teams, sales leaders spend a lot of time sort of saying, add 22 fields to the first page of whatever tool you're using, right? And it's like, it might be 21 too many. It's definitely, you have to make the assumption that whatever CRM tool you're using, that especially someone like us, we have millions of examples of what fields are getting used and not used. And so if you think about that and go, have we added too many fields? Are we trying to capture too much data? Because if you're capturing data and you're not doing anything with that data, why are you capturing it? Because unless you can automate a lot of that data entry, it's just not worth it. I sort of say there's 2 things we know for sure, or that I know for sure. One is salespeople do not wake up every day and go, today is the day I get to data enter. That never happens. So automating as much of that as you can means you have to have that integration. And then you just require the seller to be like, okay, I had this conversation and now that's what I'm going to enter. But in many ways now we can record that. We can actually use it as unstructured data, start to analyze it, look for keywords and trends. And so we can do a lot in that phone call capture now. But the second thing that I know for sure is customers do not wake up and go, I'm so excited. Today is the day I go from stage 2 to stage 3 in the sales process. So if you think about those 2 things, it's like so inwardly focused that we get all wrapped up around that has no bearing on what that 28% of the time that's spent on selling. Like, how do we actually reduce the 72 of non-selling? And that's process, that's data integration, that's data integrity, that's sales ops, that's all of those things. But if you can keep those 2 things in mind, that your sellers don't want to data enter and your sales reps don't care. I mean, your customers don't care what stage in the sales process they're in. Trust me, you'll have a much different sales meeting tomorrow.
You have called out not just the elephant, but you've called out a whole herd of elephants in the room with what you said. But this is what I find so interesting. It's just because it can be measured doesn't mean it should be measured. And again, I find so many people, well, gee, we can measure this. I don't care. I don't care. I mean, because it feels like we spend so much time in sales measuring trailing indicators. Yes. And I want to be looking at where the business is going in the future. That's what I want to be looking at. But the other piece that really struck me as to what you said is the whole fact that we sit here and we are guilty of overcomplicating things.
Yes.
Because you're right. The customer doesn't wake up and, oh, wow, today's the day I get to go to stage 3 in their sales process.
Right.
That just does not happen. And yet, for some reason, we on the sales side of the table think, oh, guess what? We're going to move them to stage 3 today. Wrong. How do we peel the onion to get this fat out of the system, to get this more simplified? To where we can really do what we need to do.
Yeah, I actually coined this term called the seller's dilemma when I was still at Gartner, and I'd included it in my book, Growth IQ. And it's a play on Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma.
Which I happen to be holding right now for those of you
watching
the video.
Yes,
there it is.
There you go.
There you go. I got it off my bookshelf. In fact, it's even signed by you. So there you go.
Amazing. And that happened in Boston, I think.
That probably happened in Boston.
So the seller's dilemma is really for sales leaders to do 2 things that are sometimes at conflict with each other. One is, how do I optimize the business and do all these things we're talking about, right? Looking for inefficiency, streamlining processes, making sure that the systems are effectively integrated and, et cetera, all the things we just said, while at the same time hitting numbers. And sales leaders, unfortunately, will always default to hitting numbers, because if they're not hitting numbers, they don't keep their job anyway.
Bingo. Right.
So this is where a sales leader and sales ops can really start to work together much more strategically. They aren't just somebody who you toss over, I need 5 more fields, to what you were just saying, Mark, right? Like if you're not going to measuring it and you don't really need to, that's one aspect of it. But a lot of it has to do with the actual processes sellers have to go through in order to sell something. If you remember, Mark, when we did the story of sales that Salesforce put out, it was a movie about what it was like in the day in the life of a salesperson. It was said that companies do 2 things. They make stuff, they sell stuff. So that's kind of it. So if you don't sell very well, then it's always going to be this struggle. You're going to add more heads to your selling team because only half are hitting quota. Instead of let's focus on making them 2 to 5% more effective in achieving quota every quarter, every month, or every year, or every 6 months. What'll happen if you raise quota attainment across your team just by 2 to 5%? You're going to be successful, and especially if you're doing it quarter over quarter. So this is where, if you don't have a sales ops person on staff, maybe that's your next hire. Instead of hiring a net new salesperson, because companies think that the only way they can grow is cut costs, which we'll put that one aside, spend more marketing dollars, hire more salespeople, right? And there are more ways to do it, hence why I wrote the book. But if you think about that and you go, if I can optimize what I'm doing today, while at the same time I'm transforming underneath sort of the engine, and I'm innovating on ways in which I can present our products and services to our customers in the future, if you can do all 3 of those things at the same time, you will be successful. The problem is, it's very difficult to do without having people who are focused on it. So if you are an individual who has to be responsible for all 3, you may say something like, on Mondays, I'm all about, sales ops. I spend the day with sales ops. I'm looking at processes. We're looking for inefficiencies. On Tuesdays, I do. And then on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm really working with the sales team on closing business. If you can get to some kind of consistent behavior and make small little pivots like that, 6 to 12 months from now, you'll have a very different selling organization, especially on time spent selling and quota attainment.
I love it. I got a theory I want to run past you in a second. But before we do that, we need to thank the great people at Calendly for their sponsorship. If you're ready to get control of your calendar and book more high-value meetings, then it's time to get started with Calendly. And again, the link will be in the show notes. Okay, my theory is this. When people are missing quota, and when sales managers are missing quota, what do we do? They look for justification as to why they're missing quota. Thus, they start let's look at this measurement. Let's look at this metric. And we create metrics, we create measurements, we create processes to justify why we're missing or to validate that, this isn't going to happen again. Thoughts?
Yeah, what we definitely saw over the last 2.5 years is the KPIs and metrics got more stringent. There actually became more. And so some of that is, I can't see you. You're not in the call center. You're working from home. You're selling remote. You might have been an inside sales rep, an SDR, whatever, working on ABM efforts or whatever it was. And now that you're not physically in line of sight of managers, unfortunately, those metrics increased. And that rigor around that was much more around, are you doing what we're paying you to do? And really focusing on that versus taking a beat and saying something like this, Mark, you and I've been doing this for quite a long time, but the very first time I got trained on calling 100 people, 10 call you back, 2 will make a meeting, 1 will close kind of a thing was like 1996. And really I was still a little late. Yet in many cases, that's the way sales managers do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you call 100 people?
Right.
That's the metric I'm going to look at versus saying, wait a second, that was set up when we were using a single user version of Actor Goldmine. We're not in that space anymore, right? There is so much intelligence and power in the technology that I, as a manager, would rather have you call the 10 that are more likely to do something today from stage 2 to stage 3 based on the intelligence that the system is telling us, because we've now integrated it. Now sales reps are not having to date or enter so much, because then you're reliant on them doing that, which we know that isn't what they tend to do. And so if you are a leader and you start to see a growth stall, right, that sales stall in your revenue, I would start first looking at, what are your processes? What are your systems? Don't try and boil the ocean, but ultimately, I bet you will find fat right away on the things you're expecting your sellers to do, that in reality, what you're telling them is, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be successful. And we know that that's not true.
Oh, I love what you're talking about there because again, we so many times we're out there trying to boil the ocean in terms of our number of leads and so forth. And what you're saying is let's use the insights we have to narrow it down. And like I said, spend more time with the 10 versus the 100. But our DNA, our sales legacy history says,
Yep.
I got to call 100.
Yep. Well, I mean, let's go back to this, right? So when I say this in front of a room full of sellers, like they all applaud. I mean, they go crazy. But the problem is the individual sellers don't get to make that decision. It's a
You
sales
got it.
manager, right? And so once again, many sales managers and sales leaders used to be salespeople. So when they become managers, they manage the way they were managed to do the things they were doing. So having a beginner's mind is very different than having a fixed mindset, right? That sort of the expert's mind. This has always worked, calling 100 people. You're right. It worked at a point in time. And it's not that it might not work now. It's that it doesn't need to happen that way, because technology has done so much for us. But this goes back to what I was saying, right? That cross-functional alignment. Like, do you even have an agreed upon definition of a marketing or sales qualified lead? Do you have an agreed upon definition between the two? So are the leads, sales say they're terrible, marketing says no one's following up on them? Like, start with definitions, start with handoffs. Is marketing looking and giving sales the plays to be successful based on the intelligence they have? And it has to start with managers making those behavior shifts. You can't flip a switch, short, small ones over time. But what I'll also tell you, this is a Bain stat that I think it's like 47, I think it's 47, it's in the 40s% of sellers would not spend $1 for 1 hour of their manager's time.
Wow. Drop the mic on that one.
Right?
That
And
is
what crazy.
Wow, that's crazy.
Right? So now we say, okay, hold on a second. A lot of that has to do with managers are, coaching on that mechanics. Call 110, what's happening with this deal, that deal. And as a sales rep, I'd be like, my God, I spent 2 hours in Salesforce yesterday entering all this information. You're asking me all the questions that are already in the CRM system. So what does that tell me? Don't enter it into the CRM system because my manager's not looking at it anyway. Right. So managers have to change that behavior to say, I can grab a dashboard and look for certain signals. And based on what Tiffany's doing, that's what we're going to talk about. And I'll spend time coaching on the soft stuff because the metrics and everything are things we all can see. And I can send a note and say, hey, take a peek at this. I've noticed this is dropped. I don't need to spend time with you on it. And so coaches are really failing sales managers are really failing their people in not coaching on the things that will help them actually become more efficient, and do the things that they need to do. But this goes back to I don't know how, I'm scared, it's uncomfortable for me, I'm insecure about it, like I don't feel safe about making mistakes. And so it has to go all the way up the organization. And so this is why I said it is that dilemma, the seller's dilemma of transforming and executing while at the same time you're hitting numbers. And that's why I started this entire conversation out, Mark, with, unfortunately, we're just not nailing the basics.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're getting some great comments from people. People are loving this conversation. And again, this whole basics thing, we're not playing in the right sandbox,
right,
in all the various divisions, departments, sales enablement, operations, whatever you want to call it. But it's interesting. I've got this theory that if we really want to change sales, it's not so much changing the salesperson, it's changing the sales manager, because the sales manager is the one that is, I think, not embracing what they need to be embracing.
Well, listen, here's what I'd say there. There's a stat from the World Economic Forum that, 50% of employees will have to reskill by 2025. I was physically at WEF on Thanksgiving in Geneva, and we were having this conversation about this whole reskilling and what it was meant about it. And, I always sort of come at it with the lens of like what I pay attention to, right? So let's say sales, marketing, and customer service. And this is really about, do your sales managers promote learning? Are they themselves learning? Yeah. Are they themselves making an effort to become a student of their profession? When I was selling and carrying a quota and managing sales teams, I was a student of my profession. I was grabbing everything I could. And that was before the web and TED Talks and everything online. It was newspapers and magazines and conversations, right? And so now there's a lot more. So managers, constantly have to be investing in themselves because one, as I said, most of the time they've been promoted as a salesperson, individual. They don't know how. They don't know how to manage. One. Two, so take a class online. Listen to a TED Talk. What does it mean to be a successful manager? How do you get people to follow you? How do you make hard decisions? How do you see around corners? If you're really looking as a sales leader to improve your ability to look at data and make the right decisions, I recommend Nancy Duarte's book, Data Story. She's one of my favorite humans. She's an amazing storyteller, and she will help you learn more about data and how to tell a story to get people to do what you need them to do. Secondarily, if you use our technology, go to Trailhead. It's free learning online to figure out ways to not only use the technology, but to how to be a better storyteller, how to be a better data analyst, like whatever it is, it's all free. So there's no excuse for you not to invest in yourself. If you don't invest in yourself, trust me, nobody else will. So if you're a sales manager listening, carve out a couple hours a day to learn. If you're an individual sales contributor, carve out a couple of hours, in a week to learn. Never ever get beat because someone outthinked you, right? Like growth is a thinking game. Like and the seller that wins today, trust me, will use technology and the things I just talked about better than you.
The power and the need to learn now is greater than it's ever been. And you're right. We have a lot of sales managers out there who they just don't. I was with a VP of sales of a company. If I said the name, you would maybe recognize it. And he says, I don't read books. And I go, right. Oh, wow. But anyway, hey, our time has slipped by. We're at the 26-minute mark. This great conversation. Thank you. Hey, where can people, your book, Growth IQ, and of course, you are a huge spokesperson for Salesforce and all things Salesforce. And of course, you're talking about Trailhead, great source. I've used that a lot. Believe me, it works great. Hey, anything else that you want to tell in terms of, because you're all over LinkedIn, you're all over a lot of different places. And anywhere else that you want people to go to find more about you?
No, listen, I'm really active, as Mark said, on social media. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm actually maxed out on connections, so can't do that anymore. But on Twitter is @Tiffani_Bova. I'm on Instagram as well. I've got a new book coming out called The Experience Mindset in May of next year. And so that's just finished. I finished writing it. I'd love to hear your feedback on what I said. So drop me a note, in LinkedIn or put it in the comments below. I know Mark's going to share the latest state of sales. Yes. So please download the report. Yes. Let me know what you think. I just always appreciate, Mark, your support. It's been a while, and my love runs deep for sellers. So anytime I get an opportunity to talk about this, I'm always in.
Hey, our paths will cross again very, very soon. And you're right. We're going to put a link in the show notes to download the study that Tiffany's been talking about. But right now we need to say, hey, thank you for listening. And thank you, Calendly, for sponsoring today's show and continuing to help sales teams focus on driving revenue. Prevent scheduling delays that stall deals and let your team focus on what they do best, driving revenue. You can get your demo of Calendly today. Hey, I do trust you value the content and what was shared, and you'll take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Each week, you get 2 shows. One, a short sales insight from me, and the second, an interview with a leading sales expert, like today with Tiffani Bova. Hey, the Sales Hunter Podcast, your answer to cutting-edge insights. I'm Mark Hunter. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.